Welcome to the Real Estate Investing School podcast. I'm your host, Joe Jensen. Our guest today is James Lowry with Rethink the Rat Race. Stoked to have you on, man. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, Joe. How about you?
Good, good. Stoked to finally be able to connect. So, quick bio on you, James. Put you on the spot here. So, James and his wife, Emily, were just two regular people working regular jobs, living a regular town where they found the financial independence movement. They went all in and focused on real estate, buying their first property in 2017. Within 2 years, they had 10 units and enough cash flow to leave their jobs. Now they're still two regular people, but they live an extraordinary life of travel, adventure, while self-managing their small portfolio. So congratulations on that. That's a really fast jump from really just being introduced to real estate and then being financially free through it. So congratulations, man.
Thanks. Yeah, it was pretty aggressive. So,
Yeah, so I want to dive into that, but maybe you could just, share anything about us, about yourself with us that you'd like us to know, and then how did you first get introduced to real estate?
yeah, so a lot of people hear that and they hear how quickly we did it, and they're like, okay, mommy and daddy's money, all this kind of stuff. And actually, like, I grew up very poor, like cars repossessed multiple times, utilities cut off multiple times. Even currently, I have hired my mom to be part of our Airbnb processes so that
Nice.
my sisters and I don't have to give her money, and so she can feel like she's earning it. And so I do want to preface it by saying, this, like, we started at zero and it was just the two of us. None of our family invest in real estate. They don't even really invest almost at all. And
Hmm.
so yeah, that was the first part of that. Then there was the second part to your question. I'm not sure what it was.
Yeah, no, just so how did you first get introduced to real estate as an investment tool? Because obviously everybody knows real estate exists. They live in a house, they see real estate agents and stuff like that. But when did it first come across your radar? Like, oh man, this is a way to like build my freedom.
So it actually happened. I was working. This is when I was kind of in college, kind of out, like it kind of fizzled. But I was working at a gym as a gym manager, and I read The 4 Hour Body by Tim
Hmm.
Ferriss, which is his lesser known book.
Yeah.
And the way that he like hacks all the little systems and things like that, it really kind of like opened my eyes. And then so from that, I decided to read his other book, The 4 Hour Work Week, and in that he talks about passive income and writing an ebook, writing a blog, and doing all these different things. And one of the things he's mentioned is real estate. And at the time, I didn't have any online presence, and I thought no one wants to listen to what I have to say. So I kind of focused on the real estate part of it. And so I went to Bigger Pockets and started reading about like real estate investing and all this stuff. But then I let my limiting beliefs get the better of me.
What's up, guys? Thanks so much for tuning into the show. I have an announcement. In just a few weeks, we are hosting a live event called the Cash Flow Conference. This is April 29th. This is an in-person event where you can come and learn from expert real estate investors and how to get to the next level in your real estate investing career. So you're going to be able to network with other individuals. We'll have about 300 people just like you all across the board, beginners, intermediate, advanced, and come together to network and to get better at investing in real estate. We'd love to see you there. There's still time to snag a ticket. Click on the link in the show notes and enjoy the show.
At the time, I was a gym manager and I was making like $12 an hour plus commissions, and still living at home with my mom, and dating my now wife. But at the time, I didn't have any money to speak of, and I was just like, okay, there's no way I can qualify for these down payments and stuff like that. And so I
Right.
just let the idea fizzle. And so then a few years later, when we found out about the financial independence movement, I decided, like everybody else is focusing on index funds and stock markets and stuff like that. And I actually really think real estate should be the way to go because I can control so many more of the inputs, and then that changes the output for me. So that's kind of why I was predispositioned toward real estate.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what was the gap between when you've read those books, you start listening to podcasts and you're like, dude, this is cool, but I don't think I can do it, to the point where you're like actually starting to like make moves?
It was probably 4 years. And
Yeah.
like I went all in at one point and like read and listened to the podcast and stuff like that. And then like radio silence. I did not think
Hmm.
about real estate investing. I did not focus on it. I didn't learn about it. So those 3 years was like zero. And then it was like I started back at square one 3 years later and decided to focus on real estate.
It's funny how often that's the case, right? Where it's like you get all excited, you see it, but then life just gets in the way. Or like say you have these limiting beliefs, like that's cool. Like someday when I'm, here, then I can do that, but not now, so break down. You mentioned the financial independence movement. So explain to the listeners what that is.
So essentially, what we focused on is the retire early part of the financial independence movement. And so what you're doing is you're investing enough money now, so you're living frugally, boosting your income, and then saving the difference as much as you can to invest to create passive income. And so one of those ways is through index funds, and other ways through real estate investing. And there are a number of ways you can do it, but those are probably the two most popular. And index funds, I think, is grossly more popular than real estate. Like in the real estate circles, obviously real estate's popular, but in the
Hmm.
financial independence circles, we're like kind of a novelty because we focus on real estate.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, because I'm definitely more real estate focused as well. I don't do anything in the market. For a lot of the things you mentioned, right? It's like I have a lot more say on the inputs and the outputs, the exits. Like I have an actual asset. I feel like just so much more in control. Than I feel like as soon as I put in the stock, it's just like hope and pray, and that other people do things that work out for me. But that's cool, man. So what was your first deal then? Like what did you actually do to pull the trigger? Because you studied it, got real into it, waited a few years, then got re into it. But like what was the actual step of like action?
So it kind of like was like dipping our toe into it. So we were living in a fancy condo at the time and sold it and bought a cheaper condo. But the goal was to move out of it within a year and rent it out. And so that was kind of the end goal. But while we were living in that condo, so we hadn't really invested. We bought our first investment property to
Hmm.
do that in the future, but hadn't done it yet. So it was essentially us just living in it.
Right.
So while we were living there, we found a duplex in like a sketchy area. Like we were still pretty poor, and so we were just like scrapping by trying to save as much money as we could. And so to us, like the cheaper properties really appealed. And so we found a duplex for sale, and it was for sale for I think 60,000, and each side was a 2-1. And we went and looked at it, and my wife was like, "We are not getting this," and I agreed with her. I was like, "This is not where we want to be." And so we let it kind of just like fizzle again, and then it was still available a couple months later. But at this point, we were up in St. Louis on a work assignment, and I was like, "I'm just going to throw in a lowball offer." And so we offered 47, and my thought was, one, we're young, right? And so if worse comes to worse, all we've lost is $47,000, and we weren't buying with cash. So we were really losing like 13,000 because that's what we had
Hmm.
to put down. And so that was like my thought process. Like the worst case scenario, this goes completely south, then all we've done is maybe set ourselves back a year, but the upside is so much higher. And I just convinced her essentially. I was like, hey, I'm just going to throw in a lowball offer. We're never going to go to this property. And that's exactly what happened. We ended up buying it pretty much remotely, placing a tenant, hiring a property manager, and we didn't deal with that property for another like 2 years.
That's awesome. Did you ever end up going to the property?
So we met one tenant, and this was after we had owned it, I think 3 years. Like we met the tenant that lived there and had been paying us the whole time. So it was perfect.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's the thing. I think it's so key is like investing is different than like I guess there's levels, right? You like there's these trophy properties that you're like these are amazing dream places you want to hold on forever, but it's also an investment. It's paying for itself. Maybe it's like an Airbnb, in Hawaii or something. It's like these dream, ones. And then there's just like your normal houses, you know what I mean? And it's like that they don't need to be this sexy trophy property. Not all of your assets are going to be there, and usually those don't have as high as returns, and so it's like you kind of have stepping stones, and everybody needs a place to live, and even though it might not match your quality of standard of living, that doesn't mean it doesn't match your standard of investing. So.
Exactly, exactly. And I try to tell people that all the time. Like the dream house on the corner in a great school district, the likelihood is that actually makes a pretty poor cash flowing investment. You're
Yeah.
banking on appreciation and other things, but to me, that's not really my niche.
Well, it's funny because there's been a huge insurgent of the value of mobile home parks, right? Like they're like really cool now. Like Brandon Turner was probably a big part of that. Like, oh, I buy Brand mobile home parks. It's like they've become like cool, but like they're back in the day they were like, and that's why they were cool for such periods. They were so looked down upon. Like, what is that asset class? Like, oh, I don't want to buy that. And so they were kind of just like this missed gem. And then some really smart guys kind of jumped on it and blew it up. And now it's not as special as it was because now it's gaining value. But it's like, yeah, it's just the same thing. It's just funny because those I think mobile home parks are cool now. But you say, oh, I bought a $60,000 piece, $47,000 piece of junk duplex in. So is it in St. Louis or where was it at?
No, it's actually in North Alabama. So we
In
invest
okay,
only in Huntsville, Alabama.
okay, nice. So in Alabama, about this, and people are like,
Yeah.
"Ooh, good for you!" Like
Yeah.
that's not gonna make you rich, but it's like, well, actually, it can at least make me free, and then with my freedom, I can figure out how to get rich. And
Right.
that's what's cool about it. So what would you do from there then? So you buy this cheap one. It's like obviously a lower income area. You get some tenants in there. Did they always pay their rent? How many evictions? Like how much were you chasing stuff down?
So we have not had a single eviction at that property. We've ended up selling it now, but now that the market has flown up, we decided to sell it. But in the 4 years that we owned it, we didn't have a single eviction. Everybody paid on time every single month. Never had a single issue out of it. And actually, if anything, that jaded me. I was like, I'm buying this shitty little property, and I'm getting like $400 a month in cash flow if there's no like maintenance or issues. I'm like
Hmm.
this. I'm the best. I'm the best investor ever. Like this is the easiest thing I've ever done. And
Yeah.
so we decided to buy a house that had a mother in law apartment off of it. And while we were in the process of closing on that property, two duplexes side by side popped up. And we didn't have enough cash. And we weren't like, at this time, we weren't creative enough to figure out how we could get the deal. So, I mean, we were because we did get all the deals. But um, so what we decided to do was the house was more expensive. So we decided to owner occupy it and live in the mother in law so that we could put down a smaller down payment and get a better interest rate. And that gave us enough cash that we could put 25% down on both the duplexes. So we ended up having three closings in a month, and that got us 6 units.
Wow. Like, and I guess that's how you moved so fast, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so the down payments for these duplexes was these just from savings, just both of you, two incomes, working hard, stashing whatever you can aside, being frugal to have those down payments. Is that where that came from?
Yeah, exactly. And particularly the frugal part. Like it was like we looked at our spending and we were like, okay, how can we cut this? How can we cut this? How can we cut this? It was literally every single thing we spent money on, we found a way to make it cheaper, whether it was our phone bill, whether it was our internet, whether it was I started biking to work because I didn't want to pay for gas. Like we were absolutely wild on some of the stuff we were doing.
It's crazy the compounding effect of so many of those little decisions. And it's like, and people are like, oh, I don't want to live like that. It's like, well, yeah, no one does, but and that's not the plan. You don't need to live like that forever. But doing it for a moment can really be a powerful thing if that's what you need to do. You know?
Yeah, exactly. And I think like making the smaller decisions actually makes the bigger ones almost easier. And yeah, the big three were like the biggest part of it, right? We decided to house hack, and so we were living for free.
Hmm.
And then we decided to, like lower our car expenses by biking to work. And like I felt like I had to do it at this point because I was working at a physical therapy clinic. And to me, I'm seeing all the people coming in getting physical therapy and they can't do this, they can't do that. And I'm like, I can physically do this. Like I should do it. I have like a moral obligation to bike to work. And so it was like the things I told myself to make it like rational.
Right? You're like this will be good for my bank account, but it's also gonna be good for my health. So like, let's go.
Exactly.
Yeah, man, it's interesting to be able to kind of see what and just cars like are so expensive. Like if people, oh, there's nowhere I can cut. It's like, man, insurance on it, the payment on it, like the cars. A lot of times, if people don't own a home, that is their biggest expense. And yeah, you carve that out for a few months, and it's like you have money for a down payment on something cheap.
Yeah.
Um, So you primarily invest out of state then and do it remotely, or are you like close to your properties now?
So yeah, we the first property we bought when we were out of state, but then we were there for a work assignment, and then we came back to the Huntsville area, and so
Hmm.
we've bought them all kind of locally. Like we bought a couple while we weren't in town, but we managed them all like we're remotely. Especially because like now that once we hit the number that we needed to, we started traveling pretty extensively. Like we did 8 months in Europe and managed them all
Nice.
ourselves, and still do that to like COVID messed that up a little bit, but now we're still traveling for a few months of the year at least, and we're actually only in Huntsville for probably like 2 or 3 months of the year, maybe four, depending on the year.
Yeah, and even when you're in town, it's not like you're changing toilets and repairing things or going and visiting tenants. It's like I said, you set it up so it's like you don't you're hands off whether you're next door or across the world.
Exactly, exactly. So we spend our time like with family and friends and doing stuff in the area while it's like the weather's nice, and then we try to leave the second it gets too hot or too cold.
So for those listening, they're like, "Well, that's a dream." Like, what does that look like to manage a property remotely or a small portfolio? Because you've got what, 10 units now, more than that?
Yes, so we have 10 and 5 are short term rentals and medium term, like both of those, and then 5
Hmm.
are long term. And so having processes in place definitely make the whole thing easier. Like we're not driving around collecting cash or checks from tenants. We're not the ones going and doing any of the work on the properties. And so like outsourcing a lot of that is a key part of it. And then having a trusted team, like a trusted handyman, and then we have a trusted cleaner to do our Airbnb cleanings. And then like it's just like the Airbnbs actually to me like the short term rental aspect of it are it's a lot of fun because you get to add creativity in the property, and then when we come into town we can stay in one, and it's like a nice place for us to stay, and it has all the things we need, and all we have to do is bring our bag, and so that's like it's honestly the perfect setup for us.
That's cool. So do you hire property managers or you are the property manager and you just have the systems in place that like the cleaners and stuff like that?
Yeah, so I am the property manager, have the systems in place. This year alone, if we had a property manager, we would pay over $40,000 in management fees. So we were like, yeah, I'd rather just pocket that $40,000 for myself, and that can, elevate our standard of living as much as we need it to, or buy us another property down the road.
Yeah, no, that's super cool. So are you like responding to all the texts, like the confirming all the Airbnb bookings, like every day, every, few days and weeks, like coordinating all that, or is it all systematized, or how does that work?
So a lot of it's systematized. So if a Airbnb guest or like a short-term rental guest, if they can instant book it, then they can book it, and then they get all the automated messages. And so all the automated messaging essentially gives them all the information that they're going to need. And so typically I'm not having to do anything with those guests. Now, one like if someone has an inquiry or something like that, either me or my wife will respond to it. Typically me, and I've spent as little as like 15 minutes a week managing all 5 Airbnbs.
Wow. And do you have to coordinate the cleaner and everything like that each time, or do they have a way to be notified through Airbnb and all that?
You can do either way. Personally, I actually have a shared calendar with them. And so that's just been the easiest scenario for us. But we know people that have their cleaners as their co host. And so they get notified when a booking is. But I don't necessarily want our cleaners to be able to message guests or cancel guests. So, if there's ever a negative
Right.
situation, I wouldn't want them to have that power. So I just have a shared calendar. I know other people that have it set up to where when they get a booking, it automatically emails the cleaner like just the information on the checkout. And so that there are ways to do it. It takes me 2 seconds to put in to the calendar like a shared calendar for a cleaning, and then the cleaner comes, and in that calendar it has the guest name, and so the cleaner is writing on the guest like they leave a thank you note for the guest, and it's like signed by us, but it's the handwriting is from the cleaner, but she writes poorly enough that it looks like my handwriting, so it's
Nice.
perfect.
That's funny. So literally, you get a booking and then you just get on your phone, update the calendar to show so that she can get in and do her thing, and then it's good to go.
That's it.
Yeah, not a ton of legwork, and it's so funny because I hear people's response like, "Oh, well, I don't want to be like taking these phone calls or managing this or coordinating that." Like, da-da-da. I'm like, it's on your phone, dude. Like, you're on Instagram. Like it's a lot less time than it takes to scroll Facebook for an hour. You know what I mean? It's not, and you can do it from Europe. You can do it from anywhere. be able to do this stuff remotely. So out of the two asset classes, well, I mean, really three, you've got the midterm, the short term, and the long term. What's your favorite parts of them? I'm not going to say you have to choose one as your favorite necessarily, but you can if you have one. But but what are the pros and cons of the things that you're like, oh, I really love this aspect of this property type, and I hate this aspect of this rental type?
So the benefit is also some of the drawback, right? So the short term rentals, they're more involvement, like we've mentioned. I am much more involved with the short term rental than I am a long term rental,
Sure.
and so that's the biggest drawback. But it also makes more than 3x what the long term rental does, and
Mm,
so to me, like the time is definitely worth the effort. So that's my favorite part about the short term rentals is how much money it makes, and the other side of it is like I get to have much nicer properties. So the ROI on putting in granite countertops or like a really nice backsplash or like this like really cool walk-in shower in a long-term rental, there's like the ROI would take you years and years and years to make this up. But being picturesque and having good reviews on a short-term rental actually pay you back much quicker, and so you can actually charge much more for it. And so that to me is like the biggest benefit of short-term rentals. I get to be more creative. Long-term rentals, I love the systems. I do love like the fact that like I haven't met a tenant in 2 or 3 years and have
hmm
never met them in a few cases, and so that to me is like a really fun process. And the passive part of it, like I'm not actually doing anything day to day. Like honestly, you might catch me like if you took all the time I spend on a long-term rental and put it into a month, it might be what I spend in a week on a short-term rental, if that.
Sure. Which totally makes sense. The the other thing that I think is really powerful is what you mentioned. Like it allows you to buy nicer assets, right? Because if there's more income coming from it, and you can buy a nicer property, which in the long run, if because we've been talking cash flow, cash flow. That's what's exciting. That's what's sexy. That's what gives us our freedom. That way we can travel and do what we wanted because of cash flow. But if you look at the true wealth that's going to be built over the next decade or two, you know, the higher the quality of the asset, if you've got a home that's worth double, triple the other homes and it goes up in value 5, 10, 20, 50% in appreciation, it's like that's a much bigger jump than the $47,000 duplex going up. Even if it doubled, it's like okay, it's 90,000, but a $400,000 place going double, it's like that's almost $1 million. That's $800,000 to double. So there's power to buying higher quality, better assets in the true big scheme of wealth growth. Even if they maybe are a little more hands on to get the big cash flow.
Yeah. And I think a key part of that is like because it has more cash flow, you don't have to own as many properties to set yourself free either. Right. So the cost of buying a property and then furnishing it is less than acquiring another property and turning that into a long term rental. And so, you could have a portfolio of 3 or 4 short term rentals that would pay for 20 long term rentals.
So Huntsville, Alabama, is that a hot spot or for travel? I mean, that's never been on my like destination, bucket list. But you get enough traffic from Airbnb coming through. Did you know that when you started doing Airbnb? Did you know, oh, this would be a good Airbnb location or short-term rental location? Or how did that kind of process go?
We kind of fell into it, to be honest. So we had all long term rentals, and we're planning on our move over to Europe for 8 months, and we were like, we're going to rent all our places out. We're not going to have a single place vacant. And then one of our tenants turned in their notice that they wanted to move, and we were like scrambling. We were like, are we going to place a tenant the week that we're leaving? We don't know this person, any of this stuff. So we just decided to turn that one into a short term rental and see how it did. And we get enough business travel, and we actually have like the Space and Rocket Center is in town, and so that's like one of the bigger tourist attractions in the state, other than the beach. And so, and then people are moving into town. Like we're getting the new FBI headquarters. Like it's a lot of business travel mostly. And
Mm-hmm.
then just in the region, like close by, people come for like weekend trips and stuff like that. So we're actually very surprised that 5 short-term rentals are even in town, but much less just of our own. And so we were pretty surprised by it ourselves.
Yeah, and well, it's cool because it's honestly like a little less competitive too. If you're like the two streets from Disneyland, it's like everybody's like aggressively competing for those people. But when it's just like normal stuff, it's not as competitive, and you don't have to have like the Airbnb on the moon. You can just have like a nice home and people will still rent it. I do a little bit of, when I travel, I tour out my vehicles, and it's funny because I was like, I didn't know how well it would work, but I didn't care. I wasn't out any money. I just put it on there to see what it'd do. And it wasn't always people traveling from far away coming to a destination. A lot of them were people in town that their car was in the shop. And so they needed a car for 3 days or a week. And it blew me away how many people that just needed that. I'm like, oh, like I said, it's just business. It's just life. It's not always this big fancy vacation, which I think sometimes people need to realize that can open up a lot of doors and destinations like yours that might not be like the top bucket list of travel, but it's still a great killer short-term rental area.
Yeah, exactly. We had a lot of people that their houses in the past couple of years were getting delayed on being built, and so they had already sold their house, and then their closing got delayed, or
Hmm.
their like all the supply chain issues, and so we got like probably 4 or 5 different like month long bookings from people like that.
That's awesome. So, well, sweet man. So let's talk about this. So you buy your first one, this little cheap duplex, gets your feet wet. You're like, oh, we can buy property. This works. It's real. And then you're gonna go buy a house hack. You end up getting a house hack and two other duplexes. Boom, you're already at six. Um, what was the next step after that then? Like, was there, how many years was this picture going on before you like got to the 10, or like kind of give us a little more um context with all this?
So in our minds, we had set a goal to buy 2 properties a year for 5 years, and we were going to house hack or like owner occupy one and then move out of it, and then just buy another property every year. But
Hmm.
having that goal meant that we were actually looking at a lot of properties, and so by being able to spot the cash flowing properties as soon as they came on the market, we were like, oh, okay, well let's get this one. Oh, okay, well let's get this one. And having a clear goal made it much easier for us to say, oh, okay, like if we're going to hit this goal, and then we ended up hitting it in like half the time. But we had a little bit of FOMO because we were talking about like everybody's talking about how 3 bed, 2 bath houses in the best school districts make the best tenants, and so they make the best investments. And so we bought one, and that was like I guess that was probably property number or door number 7, I guess. And
Hmm.
and then next thing you know, like that person doesn't pay. We have an eviction. It's the most expensive property we've bought, and we bought it because it's the safe investment. And so that was the next one, and then we ended up buying another townhouse and then another condo, and just kind of like here and there just accumulating, especially in the good, like the townhouse is in a really good school district in the area. And so that's kind of the appeal of that. And so the timeline was like we mentioned, we bought our first property in 2017, like first true investment property in 2017. By 2019 we had quit our jobs.
That's awesome. So what's the game plan now though? So you're traveling, you're living, a life of your dreams, and you've got this little portfolio that supports you guys. What's the next phase? What's the next stage look like?
We don't know yet. So that's like a day by day thing. Like so we converted. We only had one Airbnb or one short term rental in 2019 when we quit our jobs, and then COVID happened, and we were in Europe, and so one of our tenants turned in their notice to move, so we flew back and kind of took over that spot, and then converted it to another short term rental, and then just kind of
Mm,
did that same thing, just kind of bounced around and traveled and snowbird, and so we bought a couple properties since then. We sold off the duplex that we didn't particularly like in that area, and bought a couple of condos that we medium term rent. And so we're just kind of like right now we're just kind of living life. We travel when we want, we do what we want. It's hard to beat, and so it's not like we're not in a situation where we're saying, oh, we want 100 properties. Like let's level this up. We have 10, and we're making more than we were at our 9 to 5 jobs, and so it's been great, and I'm not really sure what's next is the question.
dude, I love that. I think that is an undervalued response because in the hustle culture of America, it's like go bigger, 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 and there's value in that. But I think it's something to say. It's like, dude, like we did it. We're gonna actually enjoy our freedom, and maybe in a few years after playing for a while, we'll start to feel that itch to build again, or maybe there'll be kids or this or that or other things that'll push us to grow. But like enjoying life while you can is a undervalued thing, I think. So more power to you. Props for doing it right. What's the point if you're not going to enjoy it, right?
Exactly.
That's freaking awesome, man. So I like how you were able to dabble and slowly started converting over the short-term rentals just because it worked. It wasn't like you had this grand scheme, and I think that's something people need to realize. Like, you don't always have a master plan. You get going, you start doing stuff, and then you switch this one. Like, oh, that worked. We'll do it again. We'll do it again, and like it kind of just decides itself in a lot of ways. Whatever's working best. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. And just being willing to pivot. Like those,
Mm,
like had we not known on the first one, and we didn't know. We had no idea that it was going to make money. And so we were like, let's do it for 6 months and see what happens. And then, 6 months into it, it's our biggest cash flowing property. And so then next thing you know, we have five now. And so it's and only two of them we bought specifically with being short-term rentals in mind. The other ones we had kind of converted existing properties that happen to be in a good area that we thought like, oh, okay, this might work. And so our niche is like one bed, one bath. We get couples or we get business travelers, and that's pretty much it. We don't really get families. We don't get anything like
sure.
that. We're definitely not going for the 5 bedroom house, a short walk from Disney. Like that is not our niche.
Well, and I think that's cool because when I look at long term, I don't want one bedrooms. I always tell my agents, like, dude, don't send me one bedrooms. I'm not, there's going to be transient people that are going to, come and go. They're not families. Like when I do a long term rental, I want a family that's going to settle in and treat it like their home. They're going to be there long term. I never have to deal with them, and they actually take care of it like it's their home because their children are being raised in this house you know and so I always like push those deals aside, but like you found a perfect use for those deals for the people who are trans, but you're doing it short-term rental and having them pay a premium for their nat as opposed to them just coming and going having to deal with people breaking contracts and stuff. So I think that's
Yeah.
awesome.
So eight of our units are one bed, one bath. 8 of our 10,
Mm,
and so the only two of them, one is a 3-1, and the other one's a 2-2. And so all our tenants are mostly, most of our tenants are in one bed, one bath places. And I thought the same thing. I thought these are going to be transient people, and there's a benefit to that because then I can always get back to market rent without feeling like I've upped somebody so much, and if
mm-hmm.
it turns over, then I can, go in and do a little bit of renovation or something. But our average tenant has actually been there like almost 4 years now, even using the one bed, one bath strategy.
Oh, really? Oh, that's cool. That's awesome. Yeah, I think that's super cool. The short-term rental game, when you started doing that, was it was it kind of like overwhelming to go from long-term to short-term and learn that whole industry and that business, or was it not as complicated as you thought it would be?
So I will say the first like 8 months or so when we were in Europe that we went over, and we actually had a property manager. And then when we came back from COVID, we went to our property, and it was like we had a couple of negative reviews, and we were like, man, these people are just like, really nitpicking stuff. And then we went to the property, and we were like, no, the property sucks right now. And so we realized that our property manager was treating it as a passive income stream. She had not gone to the
Mm,
property. And so she was just sending her cleaner over, and her cleaner wasn't as good. So that's when we were like, okay, if she can do this, like we can definitely do it ourselves. And so since then, like we've gotten, almost all 5-star reviews. Like we've gotten over 300 5-star reviews. We've upped, the nightly rate, like probably 20 or $30 at least. And so we're making a lot more money that way. But part of it is just being willing to learn and willing to fail. Like we didn't know at the
mm-hmm.
beginning whether or not it was going to work, and then we didn't know when we started managing it, like what are these people going to say and all this stuff. But then we were just willing to do it, like and failing forwards. It was just like learning opportunities.
Yeah, I love that. Let's talk about failure for a minute then. Like, because obviously we were like, oh, success, success, bought this, and then we twisted this, and now it's short term, we're tripling our cash flow. Like, there's all these wins, and people might be listening, like, wow, like that's incredible. Like, I want to do that. Like, what have been the roadblocks or the so-called failures along the way, if there's been any?
So, for instance, the 3-bed, 2-bath house in the great school district that we had the eviction on, right? Like again, we bought this property thinking it was going to be the safest thing we've ever bought, and then we had an eviction, and then we were there's like there's kind of a scenario here where we are like all in on something and then until we're not, and then we're immediately out of it. And so it's like, like the short-term rental thing, we were like, oh, okay, let's try it. And then it worked, and that's great, right? But so the big house, we tried it and then it didn't work immediately. And we were like, this is the worst asset class ever. So we sold it, and like for probably, let's say 10 grand more than we bought it for. Right. But now that property is worth probably 150 grand more than we bought it for. This has just been a couple of years.
Yeah. That's funny. And it's funny because it's like the losses in real estate are like, oh man, we made 10,000 by dealing with this headache, and then it's like the real losses that we could have made 100, but in reality, like you never lost, right? Like you always were coming out ahead, and then you learn, and that's a big thing too. What are some things you learned from that eviction process that looking back, you could give advice to those to help others avoid, whatever went wrong with that? Like, was it tenant vetting, or was it just like roll the dice, nothing you could have done? Like, what happened?
Definitely tenant vetting. So at the time we bought the property, and it's like November, and it's not the best time to place a 3-bed 2-bath, like family. And so the
Yeah.
only person that like applied for it within the first week was the person we accepted. And we like pretty much were like, forget all the rules that we should do. Like, let's step over all these red flags and let's get this person in there so that we can make some money. And then, like 2 months later, they were late. And then like they were really late on the second month. And then the third month, they were so like, they had just paid the second month. So it's like, it just compounded. And so by the fourth month, like they were in the process of being evicted. And had we stuck to our game plan of like, let's vet the tenants appropriately, like if it sits empty for a few months, that's better than getting a bad person in there, because that might have meant that we ended up keeping the property that we now don't have. And so tenant vetting is like a key part now of our process, like following every step of it and not cutting corners just because there's only one applicant. That's probably like the biggest takeaway as far as something that could be learned from it.
So what do you do to vet a tenant now?
So there is an entire process. So depending on the price of the property determines where I post it. So I post it on both either way, but I have better luck on Facebook Marketplace if it's under $1,000 a month rent, which is something that does happen in our area. Some people around the country are probably hearing this and they're like, what the hell are you renting for under $1,000? But the small 1-bed 1-bath properties.
Sure.
So then we also listed on Zillow, any person that inquires about the property, we send them over a pre-screening questionnaire. And so it's a free form for them to fill out, and they have to fill the form out before we'll schedule them to see the property. We don't just show it to anybody. And so that pre-screening questionnaire is just such a small hoop for people to jump through that eliminates like 90% of the people, at least, if not more. And so most people don't want to fill it out, and that's okay, because we don't want to rent to most people. We want to rent to the people that are willing to follow, the guidelines that we have. And so then from there, once they filled it out, if based on the information they've put, they're like approved, essentially, they can see the property. And so we schedule all the people to come on one day, and like within like 15-minute increments, there's little salesmanship to that, so that everybody that comes up, they see somebody leaving and they see somebody coming in when they're going. And so that's actually worked out pretty well. We get security deposits and all that like the day of, because people are like, they're interested in it, they really like it. And so then from there, it's the first person that submits the background and credit check that come back clean, and then we vet them as far as like calling their references, making sure that they're actually working. And we'll like, sometimes we don't call the number that they've given us, like on their, application. We'll like Google the local like branch office and call them and say, does this person work there? That way it's not some person on the phone, just like agreeing with whatever's being said. And so we've actually done this entire process while we were in Europe, and we didn't meet the tenant for over 2 years. We did his final walkthrough when he was moving out, and that was the only time we ever met the guy.
How did you show it if you were out of town?
So I paid a local investor half the first month's rent to show the property, because typically you can pay a realtor. Realtors do it all the time, right? They're used to showing properties. But this was a girl that like my wife and I kind of mentor. She's interested in investing in the local area, and her dad is a local investor, but he has a different asset class than she would be interested in. And so for her, it's like an easy Saturday morning. She comes over, spends an hour and a half, and she's making like $500-600. And so it was like perfect scenario.
Dude, I love that. Like, there's always a way to get it done. You know what I mean? And it's funny because your process is very similar. Like, I was just telling one of my students, I'm like, do like a showing window and have everybody come in, because then they see all the competition. It's like, oh man, there's like four different families here. You know what I mean? Like, instead of doing it like each night of the week, then you don't have to waste every night of your week. You just spent 3 hours one day. But again, like you said, they all see the other people. So I haven't heard other people do that. um but that's exactly what I recommend doing. So that was cool to hear. But yeah, I think you and I approach things very similarly in why we're doing real estate, how we're doing real estate. And I just think your story is so cool, James, because it just goes to show it's like it doesn't need to be this crazy, unattainable dream thing. It's like you could do it in a couple years if you just focus and just actually do it. And you don't have to be rich to do it. You guys just save some money and then just kept going. Have you found other ways to fund these projects as you go, or have you just kind of just self-funded off of your savings?
Mostly self-funded. We did have a partnership that we had with one person, and then like it wasn't bad. It was a great property, and we like had good luck with it. And then some rules changed in our area, and so it didn't really make sense as a short-term rental anymore. And so we sold off that property, and it was just like, unfortunately, we're in a situation because we've gotten so used to it. We don't have to confer with anybody about like
Yeah.
what this is going to be, what that's going to be. Like, I don't want to have to weigh in with anybody. If I'm going to have a partner, they have
Hmm.
to be the silentest partner. Like, they better not exist.
Yes. Dude, 100%. I did a deal with like one of my best friends. Like, we were like super close, and it's still the thought of like having to like, hey, do you want to do this or do you want to do that? Do you want to like? I hated that back and forth, and then have to explain. Like I said, when I do partnerships, it's like I do everything. You're a silent partner. And I'll fill you in, but I just, yeah, having to report to somebody isn't good for our entrepreneur solo mindset.
Yeah, exactly. I agree 100%. I don't want to weigh in. I don't even want to consider like what are they going to say if I change this because it's like
Yeah.
trust that what I'm doing is the best for the property, for the cash flow, for like everything. But I don't even want to have to take into your opinion. I don't want to take it into account at all. Um,
100%.
yeah, so
Oh,
that's one way. Sorry, go ahead.
no, no, you're good. I was gonna pivot a little bit. I was just thinking, what's so cool about real estate is, and you've mentioned a couple of times, it's like, okay, so this property you bought, the short-term rental rules changed. Now it doesn't work. So, what, you guys sold the property, or do you switch
Yep,
it to long-term?
sold the property. So
Not the end of the world. Did you make money off the sale?
yes, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, so people are like, well, what if I do an Airbnb? What'd you do with all the furniture? I'm curious about that because it was furnished, right?
It was furnished, and so we had offered it to the buyers. We were like, "Hey, if you want the furniture, you can have it for X amount more," and they didn't want it,
Hmm.
and so we just ended up like using the photos from the Airbnb listing to sell the furniture on Facebook, and just gave people the code because like we still had the smart lock on there, and they just went in and picked up the couch and left, and like that was it. Like if they had cleaned it out, it wouldn't have been the end of the world, right? We were getting out of it anyway. We wanted
Yeah,
people to take the stuff, but we ended up selling it item by item essentially. It wasn't like the small stuff. I think we might have just like had somebody go over and just donate it,
sure.
but the big stuff, like that's exactly what we did.
I love that. I just love it's like it's not the end of the world if the bad thing happens. And like, also, like, let's say you buy an asset. Some people are scared to buy an asset, like, because they're like, well, what if I don't like this? It's an old duplex. It's in a bad area. This, well, you eventually sold that. It's like, okay, we don't love it, so you sell it. You know what I mean? But it's like you learned a ton. You went through all the closing experience, buying and funding and getting it filled, and you made cash flow all along the way, and then you sold it. It's like if things aren't perfect, there's a lot of other options to get out of it and go find something you like better. It's
Yeah,
not.
exactly.
I tell people, like, I'm like, just think of it as one of 100. Don't be so married to every deal that it like has to be perfect. Like, no, just do it. If it doesn't work, pivot.
Yeah, you have to have multiple exit strategies.
Yeah, and you can with real estate, which is so cool. Well,
Yep.
man, this is awesome. I really like this. Do you have? I mean, we're about out of time already, which is crazy. But do you have any guiding principles or habits that you've developed, before real estate or during real estate that really helped guide you to accomplish what you did so quickly and so effectively?
So there are a couple things. One thing is that like I just trusted the process. Like I knew what I had in mind and I knew what my goal was, and it didn't take like I have a twin sister, and I told her that I was going to retire with real estate in like 5 years, and she literally told me, she said, "I want you to have realistic goals," and so I did it in three. Right? It's like you just have to
Nice.
be willing to do it, and if you believe in yourself, that's enough, right? You don't need other people to believe in you. You don't need everybody to rah rah, cheer you on. Like you have to have some mental resiliency to say like I know what I'm doing, and like this is my goal, and I may not know what I'm doing, right? But I'm willing to try to do it, and like that's what it takes.
I love that. Yeah, I had this post a while back. It's probably been like a year or something. I was flying into town. I took a picture of an aerial shot of, all these houses, and I circled like 10 of them. Maybe it's 12 or 8 or something. I don't know. Just circled 8 of them like it is. Like, if you owned this, you could be set for life. And there's hundreds, thousands of homes in this shot, and there's this little beep, and it's like, that's all it takes. Like, it's not that complicated. And your story is just like the perfect example of like, get in there, get a couple things, and like that can change your entire life like that. Which is so cool. It doesn't need to be $1 million homes. You don't need to have 100 doors. Just a few things can really the amount of time and effort people put into their 9 to 5 that they hate. If you put that into this, it's like it's going to be a lot quicker exit than 20, 30, 40 years in that 9 to 5. It's like 3, 5. You said 10, which would have been good even then, but 5 or 3 is a lot better.
Yeah, exactly. I agree 100%. And you get to be your own boss. You don't have to deal with like, oh, what is Nancy going to say if I do this? Or, I'd really love to do this kind of job. And like, that's not part of your position. Like, you get to do whatever you want. It's perfect.
That's awesome. So how old are you guys?
So I just turned 32 a couple of days
Okay,
ago. So
nice.
yeah, so my wife's 30.
Awesome. Well, sweet. Rolling into your 30s, doing it right, enjoying life. That's exciting, man. Well, before we go into our final four, we have these final four questions every time. Is there any other, kind of thoughts or anything you want to share that we should have covered?
I don't think so.
Awesome. Well, sweet. Well, we'll bust into this. So, all right, James. So the first question of our final four: what is a non-real estate related bucket list item you've recently checked off or excited to check off next?
So I am excited to check off the Continental Divide Trail. I haven't done it yet, but it is a bike trail that goes from Banff, Canada, down to Mexico. And I'm doing it
Mm.
with a friend this summer. We're going to do it on a couple of mountain bikes. And I've not done any bike packing like that. And so it's going to be like a real adventure, but I'm really excited to do that.
Okay, so how many miles is Banff to Mexico? And it's all trails, like mountain biking, not
Yeah,
road
so it's
biking.
yeah, not road biking, no road bikes. So they have some like fire roads and stuff like that. So it's like off-road trucks or something like that, but it's all gravel roads mostly. Or it's like single trail like mountain bike trails, and it's about 3,000 miles.
How long is that gonna take you?
Probably a month.
Golly, and you're just packing in, just like everything's on the bike packing, and then just buying stuff along the way to self-support.
Yeah, pretty much. And I am like, this is probably the cheating part of it. So my wife wants to go. She doesn't want to bike it. She has no interest in that. But so we're either gonna buy or rent an RV, like a camper van, so that she can go and bike and hike with us. But then she can
Oh,
always go
cool.
back and sleep in it. And so like we're gonna use her probably to like go and do stuff for us, so that we can like not
Yeah,
take all the day to go, and like she can kind of shuttle us back and forth. But we're gonna bike every mile of it.
you're gonna bike her mile, but she's like your support team basically.
Exactly.
Oh,
Exactly.
and then she gets to just play and do it her style, and you don't have to be away from each other for a month, so that's
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah. It's perfect.
That's cool. I've done one bike packing trip, and it was like 100 mile in southern Utah, and it was the only bike packing trip. I had no idea what I was doing, but it's a cool experience. I think I highly recommend it. So I'm excited. That sounds way cool. I might need to add that to my list someday. That's
Yeah,
cool.
well, if you want one that's a little more easily supported, we did East Coast Greenway. So it's a greenway that's supposed to go up to Maine, But once you get out of Florida, it becomes like pretty unmaintained. Like it's like on the roads and stuff. But we did a bike ride from Key West up to Georgia, so up the whole coast of Florida, and it was beautiful. But you could stop off along the way and stay in hotels the whole way, and like stop at food. So it's a much different experience.
But you're still on trails. You're not biking pavement.
So it's mostly pavement, but it's like most of it's like protected bike lanes. So it's like some of them there's trails that like there's not even cars like within like 10 miles of it. So some of it's like a bike trail, which is pretty nice.
Yeah, that sounds like a nice intro to it. That's cool. Well, sweet man. All right. Well, question number 2. What book are you currently reading?
So I just got Die with Zero by Bill Perkins. I haven't actually started it yet, or I'm like still in like the intro part of it, but I'm really excited about this book. So I'm looking forward to it.
Die with Zero.
Die with Zero.
What's the author's name?
Bill Perkins.
Cool. So what's the book about? I guess ending up with no money when you die.
Exactly. It's pretty much like that. And so like in the circles that I run in, I feel like people are so risk averse that they save way too much money to the point that like when they die, they have $10 million that they've got. And it's not the worst case scenario, but they've sacrificed years of their life to achieve that. And so I'm trying to like kind of bridge that gap over to, and I'm definitely a risk taker, so I already don't necessarily need it, but it's more to like tell my family about, like my wife's family, like they're so concerned about like retiring with enough, and I'm like, you have more than enough. Like you should think about like you have a limited amount of life left, and dying with $1 million in your 80s is much less like money. The utility of money is less as you get older because you can't do things, right? Like you should be spending your money now. You should spend $100,000 going on the like most epic Europe trip that with your family, and like everybody can have these memories forever, versus you leaving them $100,000 when they're 70 and now they can't do anything with it. You know what I mean?
I love that. I'll have to check that out. That sounds really cool. All right. So question number 3, James, what content, book, podcast, course, YouTube channel, etc., besides anything that we're related to, what would you recommend?
So I really like Chad Carson. He has like the small but mighty portfolio mindset. And so anything that he does, he has a podcast, he has a website, he has a blog, but he also has a book that was written, it's like with bigger pockets, and it's called Retire Early with Real Estate. And I really like it because it covers so many different ways to retire with real estate, whether that's syndications, whether it's short-term rentals, long-term rentals, like people house hacking, just all sorts of things. It covers like almost every method. At the end of every chapter, it like profiles one person that has retired using, reverse mortgages, using like, it's very interesting.
That's cool. And the author was Chad Carson?
Chad Carson, yeah.
Cool. I like that. I'll have to check out his stuff. All right. Last question, then we'll let you get on with your exciting life, James. All right. So question number 4, what would be your text message to the world?
So I think it would be essentially, I kind of touched on this earlier, like no one else has to believe in you. You can believe in yourself, and that is enough, right? That can be enough. You just have to believe in yourself.
Dude, I love it. I love it. Well, what's the best way for people to keep in touch with you and to follow what you and Emily are doing?
Yeah, so we are probably most active on Instagram at Rethink the Rat Race, but also for your listeners, we do have a freebie. So you can go to rethinktheratrace.com/freebie, and you can find, we have a short-term rental calculator there, and also a short-term rental furnishing checklist that we offer for free.
Dude, that's awesome. Yeah, I would definitely recommend everybody do that. If anybody knows me, they know I collect asset analyzers. I love those things, and I'll take pieces from each one and keep adding it to mine. So everybody should definitely go check that out. Rethinktheratrace.com.
Yes, that's it.
And then /freebie is it for those. That's awesome, James. Well, sweet. Well, this has been super cool. We definitely look forward to following what you guys are doing. Keep living your amazing life. Like, keep growing, but don't get so distracted on it that you don't, you don't just enjoy life. So that's awesome, man. Well, without any further ado, this is Joe Jensen signing off for the Real Estate Investing School podcast, reminding you to believe in yourself.